Okay, good evening and welcome to our study of Hebrews chapter 11. We've come to the 17th time that the author says by faith, and it's by faith Rahab welcomed the spies, Hebrews 11, verse 31. Before we read into that subject, I want to talk to you about Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom was part of a Dutch resistance to Adolf Hitler. She welcomed Jewish people into her home, and a hiding place was built to prevent the German police, which they called the Gestapo, from finding her guests. When Corrie and her family were arrested, their guests remained safe in that hiding place. Over 3,000 years before Corrie ten Boom, there was another courageous woman. Her name was Rahab. And she lived in Jericho. She hid two Jewish spies when they came to her home. And she lived by faith. So I want to read our text from Hebrews 11, and then I'm going to go back to the story as found in Joshua chapter 2. So first of all, Hebrews 11, verse 31. By faith, Rahab, the prostitute, welcomed the spies in peace and didn't perish with those who disobeyed. Now we turn to Joshua chapter 2, starting with verse 1. Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent two men as spies from from the acacia grove, saying, "Go and scout the land, especially Jericho." So they left, and they came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelite men have come here tonight to investigate the land." Then the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab and said, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, for they came to investigate the entire land." But the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. So she said, "Yes, the men did come to me, but I didn't know where they were from. At nightfall, when the city gate was about to close, the men went out, and I don't know where they were going. Chase after them quickly, and you can catch them or catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them among the stalks of flax that she had arranged on the roof. The men pursued them along the road to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as they left to pursue them, the city gate was shut. Before the men fell asleep, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us. And everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, and you came out of Egypt, and when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings you completely destroyed across the Jordan. When we heard this, we lost heart, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now please swear to me by the Lord that you will also show kindness to my father's family, because I showed kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death." The men answered her, "We will give our lives for you, for yours. If you don't report our mission, we will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us the land." Then she let them down by a rope through the window, since she lived in a house that was built into the wall of the city. "Go to the hill country so that the men pursuing you won't find you," she said to them. Hide there for 3 days until they return. Afterward, go on your way." The men said to her, "We will be free from this oath you made us swear, unless when we enter the land, you tie this scarlet cord to the window through which you let us down. Bring your father, mother, brothers, and all your father's family into your house. If anyone goes out the doors of your house, his death will be his own fault, and we will be innocent. But if anyone with you in the house should be harmed, his death will be our fault. And if you report our mission, we are free from the oath you made us swear." "Let it be as you say," she replied, and she sent them away. After they had gone, she tied the scarlet cord to the window. So the 2 men went into the hill country and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had returned. They searched all along the way, but did not find them. Then the men returned, came down from the hill country, and crossed the Jordan. They went to Joshua, son of Nun, and reported everything that had happened to them. They told Joshua, "The Lord has handed over the entire land to us. Everyone who lives in the land is also panicking because of us." That was Joshua chapter 2. Now I want us to skip over to Joshua chapter 6, verse 22. Joshua said to the 2 men who had scouted the land, "Go to the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of there, and all who are with her, just as you swore to her." So the young men who had scouted went in and brought out Rahab and her father, mother, brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the Lord's treasury. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho, and she still lives in Israel today. May God bless this reading of his holy word. This is an amazing story. This story envelops the story of Joshua marching around the city of Jericho. The first thing I want us to notice is that 2 men were excuse me. 2 men were secretly sent out by Joshua. Joshua had said to them, "Go and scout the land, especially Jericho." These 2 men were welcomed into Rahab's house. And the king of Jericho was told, "Some of the Israelite men have come here tonight to investigate the land." Somehow the news in Jericho spread fast. Jericho was a relatively small city, And the information that happened in Jericho spread very quickly. The king of Jericho sent a message to Rahab saying, "Bring out the men who have entered your house." Why? Because they're spies. They have come to investigate the land. Now, I want to go back and talk about the fact that Rahab was a prostitute. For some people, this is a very big problem. Why would the two spies sent to Jericho go to a prostitute? Well, there's historical information that is not mentioned here in the book of Joshua. And the historical information is that very likely Rahab was an innkeeper. And it would be natural for these men to go to the local inn. But a person who was an innkeeper, a female who was an innkeeper in those days, was also very often a prostitute because she serviced the men going there. So that kind of explains why these men would go there, because it's the local inn. And it also explains why the text says that she's a prostitute. So she had taken these two men and hidden them. If she hid the men, that implies something to us. She knew who these men were. She knew these men were Israelites. She knew these men were coming to spy out the land. She knew that the king of Jericho would not approve of these men spying out the land, so she was a quick thinker, and she found a place on her roof where she had some flax. I don't know if you've ever done this, but when I was a young boy, I had a friend named Craig Rogalski. And Craig Rogalski and I played in the loft of his father's barn. And in the loft of his father's barn, there was flax. And it was a hot day, and my friend Craig took off his shirt, and he was rolling around in this flax. You know what happens when you roll around in flax on a hot day? Flax is extremely itchy. And I remember my friend Craig just scratching himself all over the place because of the leftover dust or pollen from the flax. So anyways, Rahab had hidden these two men up on the roof. And Rahab responds to the soldiers who comes to investigate. And Rahab's response is found in verse 4 and 5. The men did come to me. And that far she's telling the truth. I didn't know where they came from. Is that true? I don't think so. At nightfall, the men went out. That's not true either. I did not know where they were going. This is a made-up story that she's giving to the soldiers. I didn't know where they were going. Chase after them quickly, and you can catch up with them. So there's one true statement. The men did come to me, and the rest of it is a fabricated story. There's a line in The Hiding Place where Corrie ten Boom is asked to tell a falsehood. And Corrie grew up in church, and she understood the difference between truth and a lie. And she said, what will we be like when this is all over? In other words, she was willing to lie to protect her guests, but she wondered if she would continue lying once she got used to it. Rahab lied to protect her guests, but that wasn't the way she usually wanted to live. She had taken them up to the roof and hidden them, And the king's messengers were sent out of the city, and they went to pursue them along the road. So, number one, these two men were welcomed into Rahab's house. Number two, these two men made an agreement with Rahab. The reason I don't think these men came to Rahab because she was a prostitute is the fact that they were sleeping on the roof and she was down on the main floor. That's an indication. Rahab knew that the Lord had given these men the land. These two men made an agreement with Rahab. Rahab came upstairs in the evening and says, I know that the Lord has given you this land. The terror of you has fallen on us, and everyone in the land is panicking because of you. We have heard, she says. She shared that they had heard the reports. We have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt. Think of this. This is a lady in Jericho talking about the fact that they had heard about the Israelites' exodus in a different area of the land, but the word traveled because this was an amazing event, and the word traveled throughout the country. She says, we've heard about you guys going through the Red Sea. We've heard about you destroying Sihon and Og, the Amorite kings. I don't know much about these events, but God had given Israel victory over these pagan kings who had come to attack them. And then Rahab shares how they had responded. The people of Jericho lost heart. Everyone's courage failed because they believed that Israel's God is God. That's where faith came in. The Lord your God is God in heaven and on earth. This is a pagan woman who has many gods, and this is a woman who is a prostitute saying, we have heard about what God has done in your lives, and we have come to believe that your God is the true God. In other words, even when the Israelites were not aware of it, they were witnessing to the pagans around them. Have you ever thought about that? Sometimes our witness as Christians is not verbal. Sometimes our witness is the way we live our lives and how God works in and through us to love others and to do miracles through us, and people come to know about God simply because of the way God helps us. It's 6 years ago that I was sitting in my chair in my home, and I went unconscious. And I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. And during those 2 weeks, many of the doctors and the nurses were amazed with what God did in my life, and I didn't say anything. I couldn't. But when God healed me, just chose to give me strength, and through the doctor's operation and through the Lord's power, I was healed, and I was able to walk out of that hospital 2 weeks later when they thought I might be in there for 5 months. And when God did that, there were doctors and nurses who watched and saw what God had done in my life and gave tribute to God for it. That's what's happening here. Rahab and the people in Jericho watched and saw what God had done in Israel and gave tribute to God for it. Then did I say Rachel? I meant Rahab. Requested a sign of mutual kindness. Verse 12 and 13. Please swear to me that you will show kindness to my father's family because I showed kindness to you. There is something that we have almost lost in our age of hurry and scurry, and that is taking time to be kind to one another. It's a simple thing, but it's precious. And Rahab took time to be kind to these Israelite men. And Rahab requested that they would be kind to her as well. And she said, give me a sign that you will spare the lives of my family and save us from death. And the men gave her a promise. They said, we will give our lives for yours. And if you don't report our mission, if you keep this hush-hush, we will show kindness and faithfulness to you when the Lord gives us this land. And then these two men escaped Jericho with the help of Rahab in verses 15 to 21. Rahab let them down by a rope through her window, and her window was important. Why? Because she lived on the city wall. Her house was built into the wall itself. And so she could let them out the window, and that way they wouldn't have to go through the gate and be seen by everybody in the city. So she let them down through the window, and the rope that she used to let them down was a scarlet or blood red rope. And Rahab lets them down through the window, and she suggests a strategy for them. Verse 16, go to the hill country so that the men won't find you. Hide there for 3 days until they return. And then the men clarified their agreement with Rahab. We will be free from this oath of kindness to protect you. We will be free from this oath unless you tie this scarlet cord to the window. In other words, there's got to be a sign that this is the window. There are so many windows along the wall that we don't want to mistake which window we're looking for. We want this scarlet cord to be hanging out the window, and that will give us the sign that's Rahab's house. And in a sense, this is very similar to Passover, when the blood was on the doorpost and on the lintels. It's kind of a sign the blood was there, and this scarlet rope was kind of a sign that the blood was there again. And he says, if anyone goes out of your house, their death will be their own fault. And if anyone in your house is harmed, it will be our fault. That again is similar to the Passover. The people in the family were supposed to stay in their homes when the death angel came over. And he says, if you report our mission, we will be free. If you tattletale on us and we get in trouble, we don't have to keep this oath. And Rahab agreed to those terms, and she said, let it be as you say. And she sent them away, and she tied the scarlet cord to the window. So you see, this was the way that God protected Rahab, and it's also the way that God protected those two men who were spies. Verse 22 tells us that these two men went and hid in the hills on the way back. And because they were hiding in the hills, and they stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers had returned to Jericho, the pursuers searched for them, but they did not find them. And these two men returned to to Joshua, not Jericho. They returned to Joshua, And they told him exactly what had happened when they had gone to Jericho. They made a report of how God had given them not only the city of Jericho, but the land around it. They believed that God wanted them to go and take it over. They came down from the hill country, they crossed the Jordan, they went to Joshua, and the men reported everything to Joshua. The Lord has handed over the entire land to us, verse 24. Everyone who lives in the land is panicking because of us. These spies said, let's go. Let's conquer this place. This is what the Lord has given to us. And then when we skipped over to Joshua 6, that was after the walls had fallen down. And Joshua speaks to these two men who had scouted out the land. And he says, go to the prostitute's house and bring the woman out of there, and all who were with her, just as you swore to her. Joshua is telling these men to keep their promise. She hung the cord outside the window. Now they could see exactly where she was. Go in there, get her out, and bring her here. And the two men brought out Rahab and her family, verse 23. And it says they settled them outside the camp of Israel. Why outside the camp? Because they were pagan. They were not yet Israelite people. The men hadn't been circumcised. And the Israelites burned the city and everything in it, verse 24. They put the silver, gold, and bronze into the Lord's house. And then Joshua spared Rahab and her family. Why? Because she had hid the messengers. And the text says in verse 25, she still lives in Israel today. There's another amazing text that comes between Joshua 6 and the Hebrews text that we're studying today. And that text is called Matthew chapter 1. And do you know what we find out in Matthew chapter 1? Rahab became the great grandmother of Jesus. She became in the line of the Messiah. Why? Because Rahab took the risk. She had faith. She believed in God, the God of Israel. So, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31 said, by faith Rahab, the prostitute, welcomed the spies in peace and didn't perish with those who disobeyed. Rahab welcomed the spies in peace. She was a prostitute, as I mentioned earlier. This was most likely an innkeeper because female innkeepers were often prostitutes. And she showed kindness to the spies. She provided a place for them to hide, and she provided a way for them to escape. She requested that they show kindness to her in return. And she knew they were going to attack Jericho, and she wanted them to spare her family. So she welcomed the spies in peace. And then it says, Rahab didn't perish with those who disobeyed. In what sense did they disobey? They disobeyed God by going against his people. The spies had accepted her offer of kindness. They were hidden on her roof, and they escaped through her window. The spies agreed to return her kindness. She would hang that scarlet cord out the window, and if she would gather her family into her house, she had the promise that her family would be safe. And the spies reported this to Joshua, and Joshua remembered them and remembered the promise that they had made. And Joshua instructed them to rescue Rahab. And all of this Rahab did by faith. She knew that her city was in danger, and she had heard of what God had done with others, and she was willing to take the risk of welcoming these spies, and the king of Jericho would have killed her if he had found them. But she trusted that God would protect her and her family, and she became part of God's people. Jesus is in her lineage. That's what it meant to live by faith. Even when things were risky and dangerous, to trust in the God who she knew was the true God of heaven and earth, to trust in that God to not only save the Israelites, but to save her as well. And if I show kindness to the Israelites, they will in turn show kindness to me. Otherwise, there would be no hope. Rahab lived by faith, and it says, because she welcomed the spies, God honored her for her faith. Showing kindness could be an expression of faith. Trusting God to rescue you just because you show kindness and love to his people. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for the example of Rahab. We thank you for the example of Corrie ten Boom. We thank you that these people loved you and saw how you were moving among your people and took the risk to identify themselves with you and your people. Help us to be that kind of people who are willing to show kindness to fellow believers and who are willing to take the risk because we know that you are God, even though we've never seen you. But we have seen the results of what you've done in and through our lives and in and through the lives of others. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.